One trustee waiting for quorum.
Hello?
Hello? You have two trustees, Dr. Flores. You're
Oh,
seven.
awesome. Are we waiting on,
Three, Justin, President Henry joined as well.
oh, okay. Wow. We got the whole crowd is here. Okay, let me pull up the agenda. Sorry I'm late. I was trying to deal with a couple little emergencies at the office, but I think it's all mischief is managed. Let's see, trustees.
Dr. Flores, this is Faye.
Trustee Flores,
Yes.
your script is on page 2 of the language that you need to read to start the meeting is on page 2. Just follow the script that I sent you.
Oh, got it. Okay, I see it now. Okay, well, so are you recording? Are we ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Today's Tuesday, May 19th. It is 4:09 Apple Standard Time, and this is a meeting of the Audit Committee of the Dallas Independent School District. I've seen all sorts of, I know Maxie's on here, I hear Justin's on here, Dustin's on here, the superintendent, all sorts of good folks. So I'm going to now read the statement that says that on March 16th, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meetings laws to the extent necessary to allow telephonic or video conference meeting in response to the coronavirus COVID-19. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certified the following. Notice of this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. 1 hour if it's an emergency meeting, it's not. Although members of the board are not gathered in a central physical location, we do have a quorum in attendance at this meeting by video conference or telephone conference. We are meeting by use of Zoom meeting software application, which allows two-way communication from members of the public. As we would at any in-person meeting, members of the public who have followed the instructions on the meeting notice for registering to speak during the public comment portion will be unmuted for 3 minutes to speak. If you'd like to provide comment at a future meeting conducted by video conference or teleconference, please follow instructions on the meeting notice. All other meeting procedures will adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practicable. An audio recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public. We apologize in advance for any unforeseen difficulties and ask for your patience as we navigate unprecedented conditions. If you have questions about the suspended laws, please call the Office of Attorney General at 888-672-6787 or by email at toma, T-O-M-A, at oag.texas.gov. There are no comments on my behalf, and we welcome also Tony Stevens, who's also participating via video conference. She's our non-voting committee member. And if I missed any trustees, my apologies. If you want to let us know that you're there, please do. Okay, hearing none, and I'll be looking on here. So the first item on the agenda is section 5. Do we have any public speakers?
No.
Okay, so then we'll move on to 5A. Consider and take possible action to approve the minutes of February 11th, 2020 and February 25, 2020. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for February 11th, 2020 and February 25th, 2020?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, trustees. Any changes to the minutes? If not, we're voting by aye.
Yes, please. And can you announce when we have, who's the maker and the seconder, so we can just make sure we capture it?
Marshall and Maxie made the
you.
motion and the second. And let's go, I guess, do we want to do this? So District 2, Trustee Marshall, do you want to vote?
Aye.
Trustee Maxie Johnson, District 5.
Aye.
I'm Edwin Flores, District 1, aye. So the vote passes unanimously. I should have really read the script here. It's all on here. Okay, great. So now we're on to section B, the report on district financial update, CFO Dwayne Thompson.
Yes, sir. You have in the packet the budget amendment information for April 30th, and I'll quickly run through that. You've seen this at the previous briefing. If you look at the far right-hand column on page 1, you'll see that the total revenues after the proposed budget amendment is $1.619 billion. Then as we look at the expenditures on down, the proposed expenditures is $1.618 billion. So at the bottom right-hand corner, our projected fund balance, if all revenue and expenditures matched exactly the budget, would be the unassigned of $591 million as compared to the beginning fund balance of $590 million. Page 2, again, recaps the items that were presented for the budget amendment. Predominantly, the largest item was the 3-year tax value audit, which generated about $16 million. And that is an annual event that is done on our behalf by a legal fee, legal services. And then as we move into page 3, then that is the reflection of debt service. There were very little changes in that. So we're basically the only change in that revenue is on page 4, which is excess collections that we're going to utilize to further pay down existing debt. And then the final page of the amendment is on food service, and there were no changes for the fiscal year, for that month of the fiscal year. The remaining portion of the audit of the amendment is related to the forecast, and basically it just shows our projections or estimates for the next 4 years. And if you look at the last page, which is page 8, you would see that taking into consideration the top line items, which are all of the strategic initiatives of OTI, early learning, and the strategic compensation, as well as career institutes across the additional cost of those, our fund balance would, at the end of 23-24, is projected to be right at $479 million. I would answer any questions that you have regarding the update.
Trustees, any questions on the budget update?
So
Or anybody?
I have just a quick question. It's not directly related to the budget update, but Dwayne, I would love it if you could send me a list of the items in the assigned fund balance.
Okay, the assigned fund balance is when we issued debt that was paid, that was encumbered out of the general fund and assigned, and every year we pay $7 million to we transfer the money from the general fund to the debt service to pay that down. And so that's the max that we could have done. So $7 million a year is our transfer out. So we've designated the money to repay debt.
Dwayne, sorry if I'm being unclear. I'm just talking about the $100 million in the assigned fund balance for the general fund.
Yes, sir. And that's what I'm referring to as well. It was, if you look at the beginning of the year, it was $107 million. We transferred out the $7,167,000, which is that annual payment or the annual obligation that we can, and so it came down to $100 million. So
Yeah,
as
I got it. My question is not per se about the amendment to the budget. I want a list of the whole $107 million. That's now $100 million. What's itemized in there? Not just the $7 million that changed.
Okay, so I'm trying to, I can barely hear you, but I believe the $107 million was the existing or outstanding debt that was sold numerous years ago that we're gradually paying off at $7 million annually until it's completely done. That's what's assigned.
Okay, let me just ask this a different way. What I was interested in seeing is if, there was several years ago, there was a discussion led by Trustee Pinkerton about having the money that would be derived from the TRE moved over into the assigned fund balance, and there was a resolution voting for that. So I just wanted to see if there's any remnants of that money tagged in the assigned fund balance.
No, sir. That amendment or that action item only lasted for a year, so the end of last fiscal year, all that was moved back into the unassigned, and we are reflecting that in the forecast annually to continue to be expended, but it's not. None of that is in the unassigned any longer.
Okay, good.
I know it's assigned any longer.
Expiration date, but I believe for a time period after the 12 months, we were still including it in the assigned fund balance. So I'm glad to hear that it's been removed. So thanks for clarifying.
Okay, anybody else? Maxie?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to item C, which is consider and take possible action to approve the 2021 annual audit plan. Do we want to take a motion first and then go through the presentation just so that we have a motion on the table?
You can do it that way.
Okay, so do I have a motion to approve the 2020-2021 annual audit plan?
So moved.
Marshall's moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Trustee Johnson second. So I think we have a presentation.
Yes, sir, we do. This is one of several projects we had to tackle and finish in a very short period of time. I assigned this particular task to Ben. He had a team that kind of led us through this risk assessment. If we'll go to the next slide, please. Basically, in this risk assessment, we had 52 people involved in it. We took surveys and questions and interviews from 52 people. Next slide. And then we took the risks that we got from these interviews and assigned them into two areas, impact and probability. Next slide, please. And basically we ended up with 115 different risks. And if we'll just kind of go through the next 4 slides pretty quickly. Basically, these slides are the risks which we identified. And you can take time to look at that at your leisure, but that'd be the next 4 slides. And then of the 115 risks that we identified, worked all of them into the audit plan except 28, based on the quality of our audit staff, the hours available, and some were mandated by district policy. And if we go to the next slide, please. And this begins the items that we've worked into the plan. This year we have continuous audit. Basically, that's going to be 10 minor audits that we're going to do throughout the year. We'll report to you quarterly. Activity funds, construction audit, which we're going to push off to the last quarter so that we can leave that office for a little bit of time. Edgar, we're still finishing up on that. We actually started it now. We'll finish up on that. E-rate, we're going to begin the first quarter external audit. That happens we start helping them in September. We're going to look at HCM. We'll do an internal control review, spend some time in inventory, purchasing, security. The superintendent's expense is something that y'all ask us to do. Next slide. Technology, we're getting a lot of concerns expressed about technology. We'll probably contract that out. Business continuity, standardized testing, travel reimbursement, vendor file, and administration, which is basically, the annual risk assessment and self-evaluation. So this in a nutshell is our audit plan, which we're asking you to approve, and we'll start work on that tomorrow. If there's any questions, Ben or myself will be glad to try to address.
Great. Trustees, any questions? Tony?
Mr. King, this is Trustee Johnson. I want to speak with you more in depth about your plan, probably offline, so I can get a better and a clear understanding of everything.
Yes, sir, that'd be fine. Just let me know when.
Thank you.
Alan, do you have you mentioned a few things on sequence. Can you let us know which order roughly you're tackling these things in?
Yes, sir, we've got that. We've got everybody on our staff scheduled throughout the year, and I'll send you that schedule. Basically the first, we're starting E-rate right away. I think vendor file, continuous monitoring. The first quarter, we're going to spend a lot of time with continuous monitoring because we're going to be looking at the general ledger, the budget, disbursements, inventory transactions. So the first quarter, we got a lot of hours there so that we can develop audit programs. So, but we do have staff assigned, and we do have that scheduled for the entire year, and we can send that to you.
Great, I'd appreciate that. And to the extent that you're still taking input on the sequence of these things, I would put in my 2 cents for technology being at or near the top of the list.
Actually, we have some time dedicated to the first quarter. And basically what we're looking at in the first quarter is we believe we're going to have to contract that out. And several years ago, they contracted that with the vendor. So we're kind of working on vendor selection and get that process going. We will have to contract that out, most of the work.
Great, thanks.
Okay, any other questions?
I just have a comment. I think it's really good that this time you all looked at a risk-based audit approach. It looks like you captured them very well. I think maybe the next time you do it, it would be good to tie the risks that you had on that risk assessment to the actual audit plan. And I'd be happy to show you kind of how we do it in our own audit department. I think it helps the audit committee members to understand tying the risks to the audit plan. But otherwise, I think y'all did a great job focusing on the risks this year.
Thank you. We've talked about that. You know, we're going to start. It should have started earlier because we really, in my mind, we didn't get enough input from administration. So next year we'll start that earlier and we'll do a better job. But we needed to get it behind us so that we can get a budget so we can get it approved. So you know, it's a start. It's a step in the right direction, and we know we get better.
Well, great. So, I mean, Alan, thank you and your team for putting this thing together. This looks a lot more like what I was used to from the old days, you know, having the interviews and talking to people and figuring out risk assessment and then kind of, you know, following up on things like, you know, E-rate and important things like that had fallen off of our previous plan. So I appreciate you guys going through this and look forward to, you know, making improvements to it next year. So trustees, if there's no other discussion, I will entertain a vote. We will start, this time we'll start with District 5, Trustee Nexie.
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay, Trustee Johnson, Trustee Dustin Marshall.
Yes.
And this Trustee Flores, I'm a yes. So we have 2 in favor and 1 abstention. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item D, consider and take possible action to approve the 2021 internal audit department budget.
Yes, sir. The budget we're requesting you to consider is what we believe is necessary to implement the audit plan. We're requesting $2.5 million, which is about $200,000 less than last year, and has 2 staff members less than we had last year. I will also say in the same breath, by the end of this month, I'll have 4 vacancies in the department that I need to consider. But this is a budget we're requesting you consider, which is $2.5 million, and it's the budget we submitted to finance for them to submit to you. And if you don't have any questions, we'd just like for your approval.
Move to approve.
Okay, Trustee Johnson.
Second.
Was that a second, or if not, I'll second? Was that a second, Trustee Johnson?
He said second.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear it. So we have a motion and a second. You wanna? We'll go in order. Trustee Marshall.
Yes.
Oh wait, no, okay. I think we've discussed this item. Trustee Johnson
Yes.
and Trustee Flores. That's a yes. Okay, so we are moving on to. Thank you. We are moving on to the next item, which is E, consider and take possible. I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure we announce the vote so people know that one did pass.
Oh, okay. So
Unanimously.
you have just adopted the motion approving the 2020-2021 internal audit department budget. Thank you. Does that work?
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
that will. Thank you.
I'll make sure I do that next time also. So now we're on to E, consider and take possible action to accept and make final internal audit reports.
Yes, sir. We've sent you under separate cover a presentation and the actual reports. And, you know, I can give you the summary presentation before you vote or.
Yeah. Point of inquiry, Mr. Chair. Is it possible to have the closed session item prior to taking this agenda item forward?
That's a good question. Faye, can we do that?
Make sure I'm there. Yes, you can move the agenda, the order of the agenda. If there's no objections, then you can go ahead and do that. If there's an objection, then you'd have to vote to be able to do it.
Okay, great. So are there any objections to moving up the closed session before we take up this item?
And Trustee
Nope.
Flores, before you go to that, just for my record, because I must have missed it when I was talking to you, trying to get typed. Did you all vote on or put a motion on the floor for this particular item?
No, not yet.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're all in the same place. Okay.
Okay, so then we're going to jump. Let me find the right.
It's closer to the end, very end.
Oh, okay, hold on. Okay, here we go, closed session. Okay, so since there was no objection, we're going to move to 6 closed session. The board will retire to closed session pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551 concerning the following sections. The board will now retire to closed session. The public and staff are welcome to stay connected to Zoom while the board leaves the meeting to attend the closed session. The public portion of the meeting will resume after closed session. The board will retire to closed session pursuant to the Texas Government Code Section 551 concerning any and all purposes permitted by the act, including but not limited to the following section. Texas Government Code Section 551.074 to deliberate the appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignment, duties, discipline, or dismissal of a public officer or employee. The time now is 4:30 p.m. and we are in closed session, and I think we have a separate link for that closed session.
Correct.
And I have no idea how long we're going to be in there. Alan or trustees, do you guys have any idea how long we're going to be in there? I'd guess 30 minutes, but I'm probably wrong.
That would be my guess too.
Okay, so we'll guess that we'll be about 30 minutes. So I'll see you guys on the other call.
coming.
No, we're actually looking for the PowerPoint in the beginning of that.
Mr. King, which item are you looking for?
The PowerPoint presentation in front of all the reports.
Um,
Get out on Friday.
5E.1, Alan. 5E.1.
5E?
.1.
This is 5E.
If you let me share the screen, I can pull mine up again. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And if we go to the next page, basically like I said, we divided up the job order contracts in two segments. We looked at 2015 through 18 and 2019. The summary that I'm going to give you right now only highlights the findings that we found. And basically, we're looking at $64.3 million of a $1.6 billion bond issue, which is basically only 4% of the bond package. If you could go to the next slide, please. Finding relevant data for stuff that's 5 years old was kind of hard. And we had a lot of staff changes during the period. Next slide, please. Basically, we reviewed the 3 audit reports previously approved by the audit committee and the 12 audit reports that were in various stages of completion. So we looked at the 15 audits that they had related to job order contracts, which totaled $64.3 million. And the same staff that worked on these audits for me were the same staff that were working on the audits prior to our arrival. And here's a high point of some of the findings. The use of this purchasing method has reduced over the years. All the job order contracts were reviewed by a lot of people, including program managers, architects, staff, purchasing department, legal review. Some of the information presented in the previous audit was wrong. Board policy related to spending limit was exceeded. Next slide, please. The Board of Trustees approved the use of job order contracts from a ranked list. All the job order contracts that we looked at, all 351, came from that list. 40% of the ranking for this list was determined based on pricing. The pricing mechanism used could not be determined on 151 of the 351 jobs. Next slide, please. The best ranked vendor was not used in most of the cases. In the cases where the district did use RS means or hazmat pricing, we did do an analysis to see if we paid what we're supposed to pay per contract. And for the 33 that were used, 33 RS mean jobs and the 139 hazmat jobs, our sampling indicated that the pricing was not material difference. The district did pay a premium on some pass-through arrangements with the architect. And actual determination if the district paid fair market value on a job was difficult. We looked at an expert to come in and see if that was possible. And they said, yeah, we could determine, but we can only determine within 10%, plus or minus 10%. And the price they gave us to do that was excessive. So we really didn't do any study to determine if we actually paid the best price for that job. Next slide. Use of the purchasing method has decreased over the period. If you look at this next slide, you'll see that in 2015, we had 135 job order contracts. In 2018, we had 51. Next slide, please. The dollar value in 2015 was $22.2 million. In 2018, it was reduced to $5.8 million. Next slide, please. Some of the information presented in the previous audits was not correct. Next slide. I'm sorry that it's not all showing, but the Gooch and Dunbar audits initially showed they had reported an overpayment of $593,000. And the other 13 jobs, they were reporting an overpayment of $1.26 million. We repriced those jobs. The same staff that worked on the initial report also worked on this report. And, we found out that there's basically no material difference. Next slide. And if you look at column 2, the first column, base contract, that's what we actually had under contract for these particular jobs, which is $5.5 million. The internal audit's initial estimate for these jobs was $3.6 million. And if you look at the Dunbar roofing job, the base contract on that was initially $400,000. And the previous estimate from the internal auditor on that job was $21,000, which, doesn't even seem reasonable if you think about re-roofing a school. Not sure how you could save that much money. But if you look over into the next to the last column, the internal audit's corrected estimate, we went back and repriced these by RS means estimates, and we repriced the same jobs at $5.5 million. So basically on the jobs that they initially identified a difference of $1.9 million, we basically found no difference. And basically the same staff that worked on the audits when the previous chief was here finished this audit for me, and we all worked through it. We all agreed with these findings. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. You can see that we did not use a number 1 ranked contractor most of the time. On board doc number 6582, you can see that we use a 6th ranked vendor most of the time. Next slide, please. 623331 was basically pretty evenly distributed, but next slide, please. And then 62309, which is hazmat, you can see that we use the 9th ranked vendor most of the time. Next slide, please. In 2019 calendar year, the findings on that, basically the use of the job order contractor continued to decline. The bid issues that we found with in the previous 3 or 4 years were not found in 2019, so we had no issues with that. But we did have an issue with the number 1 ranked vendor not being used all the time. Use of this purchasing method has declined. If you'll go to the next slide, you can see that has gone down from the 22-point-something million dollars to 1.2 million. Next slide, please. And the issue we had in 2019 again was number 1 ranked vendor wasn't used most of the time. If you look at the next slide, you can see the 5th ranked vendor was used on that doc. Next slide. And in 62331, you can see the highest ranked bidder was used. Next slide, please. The other audit reports we completed during this period. Next slide. With the payroll process, and we've had 3 findings. Clock-in procedures were not consistently followed. Overtime was not properly approved. And workflow documents were not easy to locate. Next slide. We completed the phase 3 selection of 2015 bond contractors. So basically, the contractors selected under phase 3 for the 2015 bond issue, we found no findings, had no issues. Student activity funds, we did 2 campus audits with 3 findings, which weren't material. And that completes our reports. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to address them.
Okay, trustees, Tony, any questions?
I do.
Trustee Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. King, I appreciate you revisiting some of these audits and, and sharing the new ones with us. You know, as you know, when you were hired to replace our previous auditor who resigned, there were a number of issues in the media about the job order contracts audits that were underway. So I want to key in first on the JOC audit and make sure I fully understand everything that you just shared. And I know separately you've also shared copies of the reports themselves. I think the JOC one was 4E.2 in the attachment, the email you sent us last Friday, which is about 47 pages here. So I read through that over the weekend, and you know, it's obviously a lot more detailed than the PowerPoint slides that you just shared, although obviously follows the same findings. And I first want to say, by the way, before getting into some of my questions, that the way that this report is organized is very helpful for the audit committee. I think one of the things we struggled with in the past is that it was very, very challenging to digest the findings of an audit report. And this format is far, far superior. So thank you for portraying this in an easily digestible fashion. So you've got 13 different findings in the report itself, most of which you just talked through. But I want to key in on the ones that have been picked up by the media, because I think that there's been, you know, some naysayers of the district who have had perhaps their confidence eroded in our purchasing and construction departments based on some information shared by your predecessor, both in some emails as well as in some public statements and some quotes that were released to the media. So I'm reading from an article that was published back in, this is a WFAA article. Sorry, I'm having some computer difficulties pulling up the article, but it essentially quotes our previous auditor and talks about how there is a potential for a $67 million loss to the district. And the auditor says that we had 427 JOC contracts, and that he has found an average of $150,000 overpayment in a few that he has audited. And so by some leap of logic that doesn't make sense to me, he said, okay, well, let's take that 150,000 and extrapolate it for all 447 contracts, and we would come up with a loss of $67 million. You familiar with that statement that was in the media?
Yes, sir, I've seen that.
Okay, so can you go back to the chart that you showed us that has the original audit findings and your audit findings for the 15 projects that you audited? Okay, is it possible to share that up on the screen? It's the same PowerPoint slides he was just going through. While you're looking for that, I think the total balance that the previous auditor said those 15 JOCs might have been overpaid by was about $1.8 million, correct?
I'm not sure what you just asked me. I'm sorry.
The total, well, I'll repeat it once you find the slide. It's the bottom of the third column.
Go back, Kay. You were there.
Right there. So the first column here is the contract amount. The second column is what our previous auditor said the contracts should have costed, and the third column is the difference between column A and column B, if you will. So that totals $1.86 million. right? You're suggesting that in fact that number was negative, which I know that it's marginally, it's immaterially negative, but this would imply that there's actually a savings of $20,000, not a loss of $1.8 million, correct?
Yes, sir. We're saying the contracts were priced reasonably close to RS means.
Okay, and can you give me a layman's definition of what your reference to RS means is about? What that means?
But basically, when we went out and bid these jobs, we bid it, and we asked the job order contractors to bid a discount off of a RS means, which is kind of like buying a car off of MSRP. So when you're looking at MSRP, you got a manufacturer's retail price for a deal. And we asked the contractors to bid a discount on that. So we went back and pulled all of those cataloged items, which is a lot of items for each job. It took a long time to do it. Our staff did it. I did very little of it, if any. And our staff went back and took every item, went to the catalog price for it, and then went to the RS means discount that we got in the bid and recalculated the jobs.
So is that a different methodological approach than our previous auditor took to this audit?
Nobody really knows what approach he took, and we couldn't find any work papers that documented it. The only information we could find was his initial estimate. And when we asked some of the staff where the numbers came from, they said, he did that. We weren't involved. We don't know.
Yeah, and so I appreciated you pointing out the Dunbar example because that one's obvious. It's easy to key in on when the previous example, the previous auditor said that he thinks that the entire roof of Dunbar should have been replaced for $21,000. Am I reading that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then the contract was for 405, and your estimate said that it should have been 387 based on RS means. So maybe there was $17,000 in excess there. Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So one of the things I also noticed that I liked about your report format is that you actually had all of the auditors who were involved in the report co-sign on the report. So I think on page, I realize this document isn't yet public, but on page 29, in addition to you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 auditors that co-sign on this document with you. I don't recall that being practice of the previous auditor. So if the same 9 people were involved under the previous auditor that are involved now, the previous document that was given to the board, there was no, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that the 9 people that report to the chief auditor were invited to weigh in publicly on their opinion on the audit. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, but you've gotten everybody in the department that was involved in this to collaborate with you on this and to co-sign their name on the audit that they agree that this audit is correct and that the previous one wasn't. Is that right?
We've got them to agree that what we've done is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Great. I don't think I have any other questions on the job order contract one, so I'll pause there and come back to the other audits because I do have some questions and concerns about the payroll audit. But Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want me to proceed with those or not.
No, let's do them one at a time. Can you guys hear me? And let's get questions on this one first. Trustee Johnson or Tony? Or any other trustees?
I'm sorry, I was talking. I was muted. I don't have any questions concerning this report as of yet. I do see something here, but that's later on. I can probably get that offline. It's just a better understanding.
Okay.
And Edwin, I do have one other question I didn't get to.
Okay. Trustee Marshall, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't see it on my list. I had to scroll down. The biggest concern out of the revised audits that I see here, Alan, is this issue of not using the preferred, lowest price vendor on many of these jocks. I read the administration's response to that issue in the audit, and they talk about their belief or their argument that it's not always prudent to select the cheapest vendor in every situation. And they point to other things like scheduling issues or previous experience on certain projects or WMBE issues that might be other considerations that should come into play when selecting a vendor. But even with those arguments being considered, it's pretty shocking to me that we are in many cases choosing the 13th, 14th, or 15th lowest priced vendor. And it doesn't look like from your audit that in aggregate that has cost us much, since we actually came out, on the sample size that we audited, we came out actually saving money. So I don't know how much the delta is between the lowest priced option and the 15th lowest priced option. But it would surprise me if there are reasonable reasons to choose the 15th lowest priced option. So I'm interested in hearing either from Alan about any conversations you've had with the administration, or from the administration about what I'm missing as to why we would select a vendor that is that far above the lowest price.
Well, I'm going to let the administration respond. I'm pretty set that you need to be going with the highest ranked bidder.
I'll let Scott Lane respond to this. I don't know, Scott, if you were involved in all of these. I know there's a cross from administrations, but Scott, I'll ask you to respond.
Thank you, sir. Yes, as we looked at these, one thing I will say is just because they're the highest ranked vendor doesn't necessarily mean they were the best priced vendor, because other factors are taken into consideration in addition to price, safety, experience, and so forth. So typically when we take a pool of contractors to the board for approval, in many situations, we don't use the number one ranked vendor. The board approves the entire pool. So as we do these types of projects, we feel it's healthy to spread the work around to various contractors if possible, as long as the pricing is more or less in line. So to answer your question, why did we use the last one? I can't necessarily say that what caused that. I would have to look at that specific job. But in total, sometimes we get into situations with number one or two is totally booked up and they can't do work, or they're not responsive, or let's even say they did a job for us and the job didn't go well and we don't want to use them again. So, all I can say is in the past, we get that pool approved so that we do have the flexibility to give work to various contractors for this type of work.
Yeah, and Chief Lane, that all makes sense to me. I'm not. My reaction is not to the fact that we weren't using the number one cheapest or best rated vendor in every scenario. My reaction is to the fact that we were using the last ranked vendor in some scenarios. And, and when I see something like that, it makes me want, I certainly get that if somebody higher ranked had done something that was inappropriate in the past or had a poor work product and you didn't want to work with them, I get that you would cut them off the list. But what I would be worried about from a management perspective is the other end of the spectrum, where we develop such a positive relationship with a particular vendor that we keep going back to that vendor and allow them to sneak their price up and up and up and up and up. And we keep choosing them because they've done good work in the past and we like them. And at some point, especially when public taxpayer dollars are involved, we've got to pull the rug out from underneath that vendor and say, sorry, now you're too far out of whack with the pricing of the cheapest option. And so, you're out of luck. And so, I guess I would just press the administration to make sure that we're incorporating that thought process so that we don't end up looking at a chart that says we chose the 15th cheapest vendor instead of the second or third or fourth cheapest vendor.
Understood, and we'll take that under advisement. Also, I need to let the board president know that I'm going to have to get off this phone, off this committee. I'm going to have Dwayne and Scott, especially Dwayne, stay on because I have to go to the bond town hall meeting that starts in a few minutes. So I'm going to be moving out. Thank you.
Okay, Alan, did you have anything to add to that?
No, sir.
So I have unless other trustees have questions, I have a couple questions. Or Tony.
I guess I got a question for Scott Lane. In speaking, he said that they spread the work around, and I guess if someone does not do a great job, they don't choose them again. Could you elaborate more on that, especially the part when you said spread the work around? How do you do that? What process, what measurements are in place to do so?
Yes, sir. It's not necessarily, I mean, no contractor is perfect on any of our jobs. And if someone, has an issue on one job, I don't want you to think that we would never use that contractor again. As I often say, it's not them making the mistake. It's what they do to correct their mistakes that's important to us, because mistakes always happen. But, depending on the work, sometimes we would look at contractors that were familiar with that specific school if they've done work there in the past. But Trustee Johnson, I would have to look at each specific job to determine, exactly why they could have possibly gone to one of the lower ranked vendors.
Okay, no, I understand that. It's just when you said that, I guess you guys spread the work around. Is that from an equitable standpoint, or what measures in place that your team decides which vendor gets which job, or how do you guys do that? Because you also said that, I guess, if they don't do another great job, you guys don't choose no more. So is that the normal process, or what is the process that you guys have?
Yeah, I think it's very rare that we have ever not selected a contractor to do additional work because of their previous experience on a job, but it could happen. But again, it's just on a job by job basis. I would have to look at each job and really determine why they went to a different vendor. I know a lot of these took place back in 2016, and those folks are gone. That process is gone. And what we're employing now, number one, we're doing very little job order contracts. I'm trying to do CSPs on every single project if I can possibly do that on any of the smaller projects like this. So we've cut that back drastically. And I think we've only got one job order contract going at this time. And in the future, if we do use them, they'll be used on a very limited basis, and we'll definitely analyze how we make our selections more detailed in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I just have a kind of a question / comment. So there was a lot of discussion on this question and Scott Allen, I don't know who the right person is to answer this question, but the fact that they're top ranked doesn't mean that they were the cheapest. Is that correct?
The top ranked really means that they submitted the cheapest bid. Doesn't mean that we priced it that way, because a lot of times they didn't use RS means pricing. But when they ranked the contractors, they ranked them based on their discount of RS means non-labor rates. And the spread discount in some cases was, 100%. So if you didn't, and that ranking was driven primarily by price. So 40 points out of 100 of the ranking were driven by price. So the ranking, basically, if you went with the number one ranked bidder, if the job was priced by RS means or hazmat pricing, then the top ranked bidder submitted the best price.
Right, but I guess my question is, you said 40 points out of the 100 points is the price that they bid, and then there's 60 points that are other stuff.
Yeah, but I looked at it and basically it correlated price, and price in this instant drove the ranking because of the point spread between MWBE and past experience, and all those wasn't great enough. So in all of these particular bids, the price drove the ranking, even though it was 40 points. But I'll also say that since they use RS means pricing, which is how it's bid all the time, it doesn't necessarily mean that they would have got the best price by going with the number one ranked bidder, because they didn't use RS means pricing a lot.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get it. So going back to the PowerPoint, just to make sure that we're all clear. I mean, you audited all of the jocks in that time frame, right?
351 jocks, yes, sir. And I looked at the documentation for all 351 myself.
Right. And then your table the other table that showed the discrepancies, the differences, those were the ones that the audit committee had either seen or were in process. This one.
That table was based on what the previous internal auditor was saying that we overpaid by 1.9 million.
Right. And that was just completely wrong. And
Yes.
now we know what the number is. Just there's a small delta that seems to be on the negative side on the ones that the auditor had worked on before. And then these audits are all signed by the people who actually did the work. It wasn't like somebody kind of squirreled it away at the very end and then came up with their own number. This is the team effort, right?
Yes, this was a team effort audit, yes, sir.
Right, but these are only the ones that had been presented before. You looked at all 351.
Yeah, well, I looked at all 351 myself.
Yeah, so basically, this report is the totality of the 351 reports.
Yes, sir. The total report, but this page only deals with the 9 or so schools that are up there.
Right. So I'm just saying that this isn't. I'm just making very clear that this isn't all the work you did. This was just you zoomed in on this just because these had been kind of in process or reported on before.
Correct.
And I'm just highlighting that point that we're only that this slide only zooms in on that small piece. And when you look at that small piece, the reports were wrong.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. I have no other questions. Thank you, Alan. Trustee Marshall?
If I can just add to underline in bold letters and add bold letters to what you just said. I mean, it is pretty rare for an audit department to actually investigate every single item. Typically we take a sample and look at, what we can learn from that sample to determine if there's a problem. And the previous auditor was looking at 15 jocks in order to get a feeling for what was going on in all 351. And he raised some red flags. So this committee, after you were hired, directed you, Mr. King, to go and instead of looking at a small sample size of the 15 of the 351, that we actually wanted you to look at all 351. So this is no longer a sample size of an audit. You looked at all of them.
Yes, sir. And if I was going to do an audit of construction, I wouldn't be looking at 4% of the dollar value. I mean, this is 4% of a $1.6 billion bond issue. So I would have been looking at all of the other contracts. This is just kind of a small piece I would have sampled. I mean, we looked at 64 million. What about the 1.6? We didn't look at any of those. So
yeah, I just want to be clear that we took the previous allegations very seriously and directed your time and your resources to investigate this further. And instead of doing a sample, we looked at all of them.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. King.
Yes,
Can you?
Sorry, go ahead, Trustee Johnson.
With the jocks, where are we getting away from the jock program?
Yes, sir. I mean, if you look at the report, you can see in that year one, we were 22 point something million. And last year we were down around $1 million. So very few jocks are in play anymore. And Scott just said, I don't know how many contracts he said, but he said he may have one going right now, but we're not jocks hardly at all anymore.
Okay. And I guess this was Scott Lane. Chief Lane, I know we're getting away from the jock program. How are they chose? Who chooses the jocks? Is that the contract or is that something that the district does?
Point of information, Trustee Johnson. I've just received a text from Scott Lane letting me know that he had to go with the superintendent to join the bond call.
I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I haven't left yet.
Almost left.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Trustee Johnson, could you repeat that, please?
And I'm about to say he have a twin on here today. How did we approve the job program? Is that something that the district does, or is that something that comes from the contractor once they awarded the job
Yeah, I'll answer that, and I may ask Chief Thompson to chime in. But typically, we go out for an RFP for job order contractors, and they submit proposals that are evaluated by staff and ranked, and then they're taken to the board for approval. And then we utilize them mainly on jobs where we're very limited on a time schedule to complete work. In other words, we're given a project very late in the year that has to be complete for the start of the next school year, and we just don't have the time to go through the CSP process. So that's a good example of using the job order contracts. But again, I have steered away from that. They were used a lot more prior to me being here, and I am trying to do CSPs on those projects rather than job order contracts. But I do want to say there still could be situations where we use job order contracts, but it won't be nearly as extensive as it has been in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, trustees, if there are no other questions, are we ready to move on to the next report?
You haven't voted on this one.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Let me look at, I thought these were all together. My apologies. Let me look at the.
They are, Edwin. They are all together.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, man, I thought I was going crazy here. Okay, so Alan, you want to go to the next report, please?
I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
Oh, that's good.
I've kind of gone through all of them, but we kind of did that, but we do have the payroll report, the phase 3 of the 2005 construction selection process, and the 2 student activity fund reports. And I kind of highlighted those, so I can do it again if you want me to.
No. Sorry, I realized I just realized you did go through them. Trustees, do you have any questions about the other reports? I just wanted to do the JOC first because it's kind of a high importance item, and then now we're moving on to the other.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Alan, the payroll report was actually the most concerning one from my perspective. The sample size you had here was, I think you mentioned there were, 93 statistically selected employees. This is on your first finding. The finding that that the district staff does not consistently clock in or provide absence codes. And out of those 93 employees, you had 32 that were missing clock-ins and or absent codes for 1 or 2 days. And then you had another 18 that were missing for 3 or more days. So, out of the 93, it looks like only 35, but roughly a third of them actually had no errors. So, that means 2/3 of the employees sampled were not clocking in. And then on your second finding for overtime, get a sample of 92 employees taken, 49 of which, so over half. 49 did have approvals, and then 36 did not have approvals prior to incurring the overtime. So over a third of employees were getting paid overtime without having been given approval to work overtime by their supervisor. So, with payroll being our largest expense by far, and a number of our team members out of I think it's 1.1 billion we spent on payroll, of that total amount, with a number of our employees being time-based, that seems like pretty significant exposure to the district if we are not actually, forcing people to clock in and out and forcing them to get approval from their manager before incurring overtime charges. I mean, as a business owner myself, if a third of my employees were getting paid overtime without having approval from their manager, I would be having a heart attack. I mean, that's a significant financial exposure for the district. So I'm very concerned about the findings in this report. I'd love to hear from the administration about what they're going to do about this, because these they marked that they agreed with the findings and then noted that most of these were happening at a campus. But to me, they're there wasn't much meat on the bone from the administration about what they were going to do to address this situation.
Well, what we're going to do is, we'll add it to our follow-up report, and we're also going to add it to our continuous monitoring. Matter of fact, we'll be looking at that quarterly. We'll do a random sample of a lot of other payroll testing too. So, we'll be testing that a little bit more because of this discrepancy.
So instead of just doing this on an ad hoc basis, it's now going to be part of our ongoing monitoring efforts to make sure that this is improved.
Yes, sir. It's going to be included in our quarterly random selection that we're going to do for payroll. And that's one of the 10 items that really have identified for continuous monitoring is payroll. So not only will we have it in our follow-up finding report, we're also going to be checking it with our continuous monitoring of payroll. It will be one of the items we'll benchmark in our statistical test. So, I don't know exactly what management's going to do or how they're going to address it, but we will be monitoring and we will be reporting back to you.
Okay, good. I'd love to hear that, make that part of an annual, like a quarterly update meeting. So I'm thrilled you're doing that. I know we've lost a lot of members of the senior administration because the bond town hall started at 6 p.m. and I know the superintendent and several other folks left. So perhaps, Dino, if you're still there, you can just make a note for a trustee tracker that I'd like a more robust response from the administration about how they're going to address some of the findings from this audit, because these are amongst the most concerning findings from an audit that I've seen.
Trustee Marshall, I'm still here.
Oh, hi.
I'm at the Samuel building, so this is Chief Thompson. So basically on the first clock in, you see there that the majority of the employees missing the clock ins are at the campus level. So what we're going to do is intensify our training and emphasis on they're completing the process, and we're also going to be tracking those missed clock ins to make sure that we backtrack to the actual completion of a leave document if that's what's required. So we do have a process in place to do that, and to make sure that we are tracking between a missed clock in and a form completed to say this is why there was a missed clock in, if it was a missed day, sick day, whatever the case may be, so we can reconcile between those two activities.
Okay, I'm glad to hear there's going to be training happening, but I would hope that we get even more aggressive than that. I mean, in my management experience, it's pretty easy to fix payroll problems. You just stop paying people. If they don't clock in and clock out properly and don't record the right number of hours, then you don't pay them. And then suddenly the next day they learn to clock in and clock out appropriately. So to me, these are items that could be fixed if we took a more aggressive approach to it, and I hope we'll consider doing so.
Yes, sir, that is true, but there's also the case of the person that didn't clock in and completed the information, but the supervisor didn't complete their portion. So there's many things to consider, but we will be rectifying this situation. So when internal audit continues to review, there won't be the same exception again.
Great, thanks.
And if I could go on to the overtime. The reference here is related to the percentages. There's a 20% and a 50%. That has to, once they get to a certain percentage of overtime, that requires a signature of their supervisor. And then as it progresses, it becomes a different supervisor's approval. The difficulty that we had when we were having this discussion with internal audit was that there was not a report that I could submit that existed at the time that we could submit to the supervisors to know who was approaching those percentages. So I, as an employee, could have the overtime to go over the 20% cap, but my supervisor didn't know I was actually at the 20%. So we have created a overtime report that will be generated to give to the supervisors so they would more readily be able to track who is approaching those percentages to know that they need to complete the paperwork to authorize that.
Yeah, I think that will be a step in the right direction. But to be clear, my concern about finding number 2 is more about the 36 employees that did not have approval prior to working overtime than it is about the 28 employees who earned over 20% of their salary from overtime. You know, those are both important issues, and it sounds like you've got a plan for addressing the second one, but my bigger concern is the first one. And once again, I will say from my management experience that if people do not have approval for overtime, then you just don't pay them the overtime, and then they will either quit working overtime or they will make sure they get the right approvals for it before they do so. So to me, these are very solvable problems, and I hope we'll get aggressive about solving them. Thanks.
Trustee Johnson, any question?
No, sir.
Dwayne, just real quick, I just have one quick question. So, because we've talked about this before, and I think on the answer that I got from, I think it must have been the police chief on some of this, like not pre-approved overtime had to do with security stuff, but maybe I'm wrong. Chief Miller.
I would have to look at the specific employees, but I believe that there's a wide range of employees and categories that fall into the overtime range. Again, the kicker with the approval was that they knew that they were working overtime. They just hadn't completed the form because they didn't know where they were going over the percentage. And so what we need to do is provide them with a report to show here are the individuals at whatever percentage they are, so you need to start monitoring in relation to the documentation. You need to start preparing that for your approval.
So is this just hourly people, or does this also include like stipends for teachers and stuff like that?
No, it'd be hourly.
Okay. I have no other questions on this item. Alan, let's see. Any other questions, trustees, about any of the other items? If not, I think we've already had the motion by Marshall, the second by Johnson. Trustees, if we're ready to vote, I'll start this time with Trustee Johnson.
Yes.
Trustee Marshall?
Yes.
And Trustee Flores is also a yes. So this item has been adopted, approving to accept and make final the internal audit reports. That was item E. So now we're moving on to item F, which is consider and take possible action to accept and make final the audit follow-up report. Alan, you want to, is there
Yes, sir. We've attached the audit follow-up report for your information and request approval, but basically everything is either in the green or the yellow. We don't have any red issues. Internal audit hasn't done any follow-up really the last month or so. So we're working on a plan now to go back out there and hit all these issues. We're behind on this report and hope to have that caught up by the end of June. But right now there's nothing in red. So we hope to get this thing a little more current in the next few weeks, few months, and would request your approval. Glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Trustees, any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple quick ones. One is on that one, the yellow one that's on the screen right now for volunteer and partnership services. My recollection of this recommendation from internal audit from a while, whatever it was, a couple years ago. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background. But a couple years ago, the recommendation was that we should take the opportunity for raising funds that teachers use through Donors Choose website and consolidate that into district hands. And I think the administration agreed to that. But the reason why I'm asking is because last week on the hub, I noticed that our internal communications department was sharing Donor Choose links and encouraging people to donate through Donors Choose, which I think is the exact opposite of what Audit had recommended. So to me, this one isn't yellow, it's red. It's not that we have, not only has the administration not complied with it yet, they are actively doing the opposite of what Audit recommended. So I'd like to get a little more detail and direct your attention to that one, Alan, because I think it's not going the way that we had hoped.
Yes, sir. We'll take a look at that.
Okay. The only other one, and this is just to, sort of push the administration a little bit, but the ones for ADA 504 compliance, around dyslexia training, procedures for monitoring adherence to 504 plans. The revised implementation date on there is the end of 2019, and that has passed. And I don't know whether that actually happened or not, but if it didn't, then I would be reluctant to extend the implementation date again. I would hope that the administration would get that done immediately, and that the audit department would not give a courtesy extension to the administration on that item, because it should have been done last year. That's all.
Yes, sir. We'll
Thanks.
take a look at that.
Okay, trustees, any other questions on this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So we have a motion by Marshall, second by Johnson. Trustees, if there's no other discussion, we will cast our votes, starting with Trustee Marshall.
Yes.
Trustee Johnson.
Yes.
Trustee Flores is also a yes. So we have adopted, let me get to my agenda. So we have just adopted the motion approving and to accept and make final the audit follow-up report. So then now we're on to item G, which is report on internal audit department's annual results of the quality assessment improvement program. Alan?
Yes, sir. I think we'll kind of go to the end of this presentation, get it posted, but this is another one of the projects that we needed to get done. And, so we I had Richard lead this project for us. And basically what you'll find out is that the team that did this investigation said in general, we did not comply with the general auditing standards that are required. So we hadn't done a risk assessment, and that was tied to an audit plan, and we hadn't done some internal ethics reporting. So we've got this internal assessment done. We did get input from administration on it and our staff, and we know what we got to do to correct it. Richard's developed a plan to get this corrected, and then hopefully when we go out and pay our contractor to come in and assess us next year, which is, the required 5-year review, have everything lined up. So we'd recommend you accept this report, and that we'll take a look at the deficiency, and we hope to get those rectified by the end of June. We've already rectified some of it because we did do a risk assessment. We'd ask you to approve this report, and if you have any questions, I'll be to try to address them.
Trustees, thank you, Alan. Trustees, any questions? Okay, Alan, so there are no questions. I'm just going to thank you for looking into this. It makes me feel a lot better that at least we're beginning to take this deep dive into our operations. And I thank you and your team for putting this together and a critical review of the operations. And I look forward to having the peer review coming up and making sure that we're in compliance. I think that this is very important. Trustees or Tony, any other?
Trustee Flores, first of all, your hand is in front of your camera.
I just realized that, sorry.
And secondly, I just have a quick question about the governance box that was over in the do not conforming or does not conform section. I'm curious what the ideal governance structure would look like. And I'm asking specifically because I think over the last year, call it 2 years, that Tony Stevens has been particularly useful for those of us that have been on the audit committee to have a set of external eyes that's an expert in this area. So I want to thank you, Tony, but I also wonder from a governance perspective, if we as a committee shouldn't invest the time and energy required to build up more, a greater presence of Tonys, if you will, a higher number of people that are experts in the field to sit on this committee as non-voting members. And I'm wondering if that's part of why we scored poorly in the governance area.
Bob, I think I'm going to let you or Richard address that. Can you address that?
You calling me, Alan?
Yes, sir.
Or
Can you
Ben?
address that question on governance?
Trustees, the description related to the last year's audit plan not being based on district-wide risk assessment, I think comes out of more of a individual plan was developed and then some information was put together to support that plan without the formal risk assessments. I think that was the major flaw. And it was kind of hard to ferret that information out, if you will. I think now we're much open. You saw the risk assessments. You were involved in the processes. I think that's what the committee should be looking for on an annual basis. And I think that was completed this year. So one occurrence.
I would go ahead and, we are one member short, citizen committee, and we do need to get more expertise in that area. So that is on my list, is to come back and bring you. And I think Tony's term is even coming to an end too. So.
No, it's not. You're missing it.
Well, we're going to have to appoint some more, and that is on my list. We do need to get more people on the committee to help provide guidance for you and for me. So
great. I'm glad that's on your radar. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I make one comment about the governance? I think you guys are doing a great job as far as your governance of your committee, but governance also means having policies and procedures in place and things like that. And I see one of the items is your audit manual. So just having things like that within the internal audit operations is a part of governance, that when these quality assurance reviews are done, we look at that. So if that helps you at all.
Great. Yeah, it does. Thank you. So if there are no other questions, the next report is the report on the internal audit manual.
Well, I believe the next report is on the
or did I miss one?
Consideration of the audit manual. Basically, we've rewritten the audit manual. Actually, Bob focused on that. We didn't really take it out, but we took the focus more on auditing instead of investigations. We addressed some issues that we had with communications with management where we need to do a better job. And this is kind of our first whack at it. And we think it's a good start. We're going to get our entire staff is already, reading it, understanding it. So this is where we're going to start. This is where our go-to document. So this is provided for your information only. I mean, it's just for your information. You don't need to act on it, but this is what we'll be working for, what we'll be working from, and we'll continue to modify it as we find issues as we work through it. I'll be glad to address any questions you might have.
Okay, trustees, Tony, any questions? Okay, hearing none. Alan, thank you very much for doing this as well. It's really appreciated. So then the next item is to consider and take possible action. Sorry, let me read this. Consider and take possible action to make changes, if any, to the internal audit charter CFC exhibit. Alan, do we have any changes to the internal audit charter CFC exhibit?
No, sir. We believe it's appropriate, but it needs your approval on an annual basis, and we'd recommend you approve it unless you have some changes to consider. But we're good with it.
Move to approve.
Okay, Trustee Johnson, there's a motion to approve by Trustee Marshall. Trustee Johnson?
Second.
Okay, we have a second by Trustee Johnson. Do we have any discussion on this, on the CFC exhibit? Okay, if not, trustees will vote on approving CFC exhibit. We'll start with this time with Trustee Johnson.
Yes.
Can I
Trustee
just,
Marks.
Trustee Flores, before you start on this, because the way this was written, it's not really clear, and that's why I gave you instruction. So basically what you're really voting on is to not make any changes to CFC exhibit.
Oh, okay. So do I need to read this whole section?
Well, no, you just, if they're clear on that, I just need you to repeat that you're actually just voting to not make any changes to CFC exhibit.
Do we need to vote to do nothing?
Yeah, because we have to prove it.
take action every year.
I thought we was voting to do nothing to it.
Yeah, I still move to do nothing.
Okay. So to clarify, Trustee Marshall made the motion. Trustee Johnson seconded that the recommendation is not to make any changes.
Correct.
Will that work, Faye?
Yes.
Okay, so now we will start voting that we agreed on that. Trustee Johnson?
Yes.
Trustee Marshall?
Yes.
Trustee Flores is yes. So we have just approved the recommendation not to make any changes to CFC exhibit. I think, Jay, report on the district hotline.
Yes, sir. This report's just here for information, but basically for the 10-month period ending April 30th, 2020, we had 1,252 hotline reports. At the end of that month, we only had 33 that we hadn't addressed. And PSO, I didn't get a chance to talk to him today, but his goal was to have it down to 0 by the end of the month. But they made, basically, we don't have very many outstanding reports. They're addressing them in a timely fashion. And internal audit has very little to do with this now. We basically just review the reports. If there's something we think we need to act on, we do. Basically, this has been handled by PSO, but this is provided for your information. If you have any questions, we'll be glad to try to address them.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't have any questions, and I will say in general, I think that your way of presenting information has been a delight and sight for sore eyes, and is making things a lot easier for us to digest. I also particularly, I'll just mention to give you some public gratitude for it. I'm very grateful for your weekly or every couple week check-in emails where you update us on everything going on. That's not something we've had in several years, so I appreciate it. But with that long-winded upfront comment, I don't like the way that this particular report is being presented. There was a previous version of this that we used to use that showed for each of the categories you have there, where it was routed and what the disposition of that was, basically what happened as a result of the hotline complaint. And it also showed which ones of which categories were outstanding and how long they had been open. So there was quite a bit more information in the previous version of this that I'd prefer we go back to.
Yeah, we'll have to go back and look. This is a generated report and, by the ethics PowerPoint, the ethics system. And I didn't go back too far to see what was done in the past. So we'll take a look at it and go back to where it was.
Great, thanks.
Trustee Johnson?
I think, Mr. King, you're doing a wonderful job. I concur with Trustee Marshall, getting updated throughout the week when you do send them in our emails. Very professional. Again, I appreciate your transparency, just being available whenever we need to speak with you concerning these important matters. So thank you for all you're doing, your expertise and your integrity. Again, precedes you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We had a good team effort on this last 2 or 3 months. They did a good job. I'm real proud of them.
Great. Well, I have no additional comments. So I think that's the end of our agenda. Thank you, everybody, Alan, your team, trustees. The time is now 6:30 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.